You've read the title of this video, and so you know exactly what this is all about. I just wanted to say that I love the Street Fighter series for helping me and my father bond. I could go into that in a later time, but for now, let's talk about the best and the worst thing about these games. Starting with Street Fighter 1, the best thing I could come up with was its interesting background designs. Seriously, these backgrounds look pretty cool. I especially love how the coaches in the background have graffiti in this one. Very realistic. And the worst thing is basically everything else. But if I had to pick one, I guess it would be the stiff controls. Now, if there's one thing that any fighting game gets right, it's its controls. So the fact that this game feels so awkward, and the fact that it actually released with two buttons that you had to slam feels so bad. I could go into more detail about other things, but honestly, that's the worst part of this game. I could forgive everything else if it actually did what I wanted it to, but it doesn't. I had the displeasure of playing it recently, and it's a miracle that this game even got a sequel. I shouldn't be too hard on it. It was the 80s, and people were still figuring out what a video game even was, but it was still a bit rough, let's just put it like that. Street Fighter 2 is up next. And to keep things simple, I'll just be talking about Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I could go into the multiple versions that came out afterwards, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll just talk about this one, since it's the one that everyone's played. Anyway, Street Fighter 2 Turbo basically has one really good thing and one really bad thing. The one really good thing, oh man, there's so much to choose from. But I think the one good thing that came out of this, if nothing else, which, trust me, there are a lot of good things that came from this. Combos, multiple move sets, special moves that felt good, controls that felt even better. But if there was one thing that I would keep, it would definitely be the multiple playable characters. That's my favorite part of this game. It introduced the staple of multiple characters being playable. Because, believe it or not, before in fighting games, that was not a thing. And if it was, you were playing as a palette swap of the main character. That was it. Those were your only options. So, what could possibly be bad about this game? Simple, really. The American port. To put it short, we got the short end of the stick. Because apparently, according to my sources, every other port in the world was given the ability to choose their difficulty. We Americans were not given that luxury. No, instead, the game is always cranked to the maximum difficulty. Because of this, the game itself is fun to play with friends, but playing against the computer, it's a nightmare. I was thinking about putting stuns on here, but honestly, that was the worst part for me. For Street Fighter Alpha, I have to say that it's probably the accessibility of this game. It's not as difficult as other games in the series. Plus, Its roster of characters that it does have are really good, most of which being from Street Fighter 1, which barely gets any representation. Now, what's bad about this game? Well, I hate to be picky with this game because it was given the least amount of time out of any Street Fighter game, but I'm gonna be honest, it's the roster. It's just too small. There's not enough roster slots to go around, and without any of the notable characters, it just feels empty. Now, granted, I am not gonna pick on this game too much because they were given such a short amount of time to work on it, but still, I just wish there were more characters. And if that's your only complaint, then I guess they did a good job. Alpha 2 is probably one of the hardest ones to find something wrong with. I mean, it's very easy to say that the best thing from this game was the custom combo. And I have to echo that because, yeah, custom combo is great. Being able to pull off a super easily while still having downsides, it's really nice. Only problem with it is the fact that I'm not sure if I wanted to return with the roster getting so crazy nowadays. But for the negative, it was really hard. I wanted to say the roster, but it gave us Sakura, so I couldn't say that. I wanted to say the custom combo itself, but I think it brings more positives than it does negatives. So eventually I decided to bring in one little thing. And that is, oddly enough, Akuma. This was the very first game to make Akuma not a secret character. But that's not why I'm a little upset. I'm a little upset because they made the Raging Demon a bad move. A move where you need all the super that you can muster, and then you need to pull it off perfectly, and it's bad. Now, that's just bad. But I think that is the worst part of Alpha 2. So, yeah, not much to say here. Alpha 3 is definitely one of the better Alpha games. As for which one is the best part of the game, that's hard to say. I was stuck between the large roster and the isms. But ultimately, I found myself just using either A-ism or X-ism, so I never really used anything else. So I'm gonna say the best part was the roster. They definitely beefed it up, and it feels so much better because of it. Again, no disrespect to Alpha 1, but you can definitely feel the difference. As for negatives, the only one I can possibly think of is that almost all of its content is hidden away, which is really sad. Alpha 3 has so much under the hood, and almost no one will get to experience it because almost no one knows it even exists. But hey, at least the Raging Demon's good again. For Third Strike, this was a bit of a tricky question because I couldn't really think of one good thing. The roster? I can't just say that again. The parry? I'm no good at the parry. There's just not one good thing that I can point to. Because it's a bunch of good things all working together to make this game super nice. But if I had to pick one, I guess the one that I like the most would probably be the selectable supers. At the start of each round, you get to choose which super your character goes into battle with. And I really like that. Gives your character more customization. For negatives, I had a hard time thinking of any. But I ultimately decided that Gil is only playable in like one version of the game, which is a little bit annoying. But other than that, there's nothing wrong with this game. For 4, I wanted to do something a little different. Because it's not really anything that the game does itself that is the best part of 4, but what it did for the fighting game community as a whole. What it did for Street Fighter as a whole. 4 brought Street Fighter back. Without 4, Street Fighter would have died. I know this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's true. 4 is just the game that revived the series. 2 kicked it into high gear, but 4 brought it back to life on the verge of death. And while it's a bit obvious, I could go into more mechanics and stuff. I also couldn't think of anything else to say. It's just the best part. As for the worst part, Street Fighter 4 has too many versions of itself. Like, why do we need a Street Fighter 4 Ultra Edition or Arcade Edition or Ultra Arcade or whatever? Why do we need that many versions of 4? I was going to use that as my complaint of 2, but I had something more pressing to talk about with 2. But now with 4, look, with 2, back in those days it was excusable. If you wanted to update your game, you needed to make a new game. With 4, you could easily just add on DLC. So, yeah. I'm not saying 4 is a bad game like a lot of other people would say, but I am saying that 4 was a bit sloppy. For 5, I have to say that while it's a tricky one to say for sure, I think my favorite part of 5 was probably the customization. Look, the ability to customize your V skills and V triggers is just a really good idea. It's basically taking what 3 did and bringing it up to the nth degree. I just really like it. But for negatives, it's also really obvious. It locked half of its roster behind DLC. In fact, over half of it. To the point where the game was incomplete at first. I'm not saying it was released incomplete, I'm saying it was incomplete at first. Took them several patches for them to complete the game. It's not like Mortal Kombat 1 where they released a completed game but then just kept adding a whole bunch of random stuff to it and hoping that you buy all of it, despite the fact that the game is complete enough as it is. No, the game was just outright incomplete and you had to buy the rest of the game. Look, I get it. Mortal Kombat 1 is kind of the same way, despite what I just said. But come on. It was really bad here. No, 5 is not a bad game, but it didn't start off very good. Finishing off with 6. The best part about 6 is the gameplay. Easily. Hands down, this is one of the best Street Fighter games to play in terms of gameplay. It's cinematic. Every hit feels powerful. Everybody does what they're supposed to do. The strengths, the powers. Oh, it all feels good. I can attest to it. I don't get to play this game much, but whenever I do, I'm happy to go back to it for gameplay alone. I also love every little detail put on here, but if I had to pick one little thing, it would definitely be the gameplay. Hands down, no questions asked. It just feels good. Also, an open world in a fighting game. I'm not sure if that was done before. It probably was, but I think 6 did it really well. Now, as for the worst thing, I could just say that half the roster is locked behind DLC again. But honestly, I think there's something worse. Half the DLC is basically just Street Fighter 2 characters. Nothing wrong with these characters, but uh why do they need to come back again? Like again? It's just a little weird. Anyway, what's your favorite slash least favorite thing about each Street Fighter game? Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, I've been the Gamer Nerd, and thank you so much for watching.